The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, Jesus said, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." They asked him, "Teacher, when will this be, and what will be the sign that this is about to take place?" And he said, "Beware that you are not led astray, for many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and 'the time is near.' Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end will not follow immediately." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance, for I will give you words and wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
I really don't like the time of year we're in right now. Don't get me wrong, I love autumn. I love all the wonderful colors and all of the falling leaves. And some of my favorite memories are of afternoons spent walking to the school to pick up my kids, kicking the leaves with our feet as we walked home, hearing the wonderful sound that they make, the sounds of leaves rustling together, a sound that is unlike any other sound that I can think of. And since I'm waxing nostalgic, allow me to remember driving out to the Plymouth Orchard on Tuesday nights while the kids were at their horse riding lessons. I would drop them off, and then I would drive over to the orchard, smelling fresh apples, breaking my diet to have a cinnamon donut and a cup of fresh cider. Autumn, then and now, is probably my favorite time of the year. But of course, none of that really ever lasts. Already the leaves are off the trees. The orchards are closed or will soon be closing. I'm back to shivering in my car for the first 5 minutes of my drive to the grocery store or to church or wherever. The sound of rustling leaves will soon be replaced by the dull noise of crunching snow. The longest night of the year isn't all that far off, and already I am beginning to miss the long, drawn-out, relaxed evenings of summer. And while I do enjoy looking out at freshly fallen snow in the morning, I detest the thought of driving in it. I apologize if all this ends up sort of depressing you, but I go ahead and talk about it because I don't think that I'm the only one who feels this way. Of course, to top it all off, this is the time of the year when we get to hear readings like the one that we've just heard. It's the time of year when, along with the annual turning from the beauty of autumn to the harshness of winter, we find our attention focused in our readings upon last things. We find ourselves looking out at the world with a focus on the end of all time. And to be perfectly honest, readings like these are not something that most people greet with lots of joy or lots of cheer. Still, that is what we are confronted with every year at this particular time. A liturgical and a gospel focus upon the end, upon the completion of all things. Bible scholars call it eschatology, which is from the Greek word eschaton, meaning the last or the final thing. Eschatology is about the things like judgment and heaven and hell and even purgatory. All those kinds of things that perhaps frighten us or excite us, but certainly never bore us. When it comes to the Bible, as I'm sure you know, there's a lot of discussion that goes on about what certain things mean and what they don't mean, about what Jesus meant or about what Jesus did not mean. And eschatology is no exception. Scholars have managed to find present in the New Testament many different ways of thinking about the last things, many different eschatologies, if you will. And while there are certainly more than two, I would like to take just a few minutes to consider just a couple of them. I know that I don't usually do this sort of a semi-scholarly talk in a sermon, but I think we need to look at these things because almost every day it seems that we are confronted by some new Christian teacher who plays upon our fears and who tells us that there is only one way to think and only one way to believe, and always, of course, that way is his or her way. We hear the sorts of dire warnings that Luke records Jesus to have said, warnings about nations rising up against nations, empires against empires, earthquakes, famines, and plagues. We hear all this, and we get more than a little bit nervous, especially living in a time such as ours, a time that is so easily swept away by chronic anxiety and nervousness. I suspect that the most common way of looking at the end of all things is what has been called apocalyptic eschatology. Yeah, big words, I know. This type of eschatology sees the end of all things coming, and coming soon, in a great apocalypse or devastation. Essentially, this way of looking at the end of all things negates the world by announcing that in the future, and usually in the immediate future, God is going to act to restore justice in an unjust world. That action, of course, is something that we can all agree is a good thing. But the important thing here for us to see is that God's action is usually being portrayed as an action, and God's action and not ours. And above all, it is action that is swift and violent. In essence, this way of looking for the end of all things leaves us waiting for God and waiting for violence. We all know this kind of eschatology. It's the guy standing on the street corner with the sign that says, "Wait, watch out, the end is coming." It's that kind of eschatology that most of us, I think, suspect that when we think of the last things. It's the kind of eschatology that sells newspapers, and it fills pews with nervous, fearful, and anxious parishioners. But there's more than one problem with this way of looking at things, and it is high time that the church acknowledged this problem. First, it says to us that God is ultimately a violent God. It says that God uses violence to achieve God's ultimate goal and victory. And while most of us are not unfamiliar with this sort of expectation, I have to say that it is far from consistent with the God that we find witnessed to in the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. Think about it. If God were willing to use violence to achieve God's ultimate victory, then what really is the point of the cross? What is the point of all that stuff about finding strength in weakness and power in emptiness? And about being the last being first, or the low lifted high? Still another problem with this sort of eschatology is that it makes us passive recipients of God's action rather than active participants. It says that our job is basically to remain faithful while we wait for God to act. And insofar as I can tell, that too is far from consistent with the gospel message. Jesus didn't say, "Wait for me." Jesus said, "Work with me." We are co-workers with Christ, members of that body of which Christ is the head. We are co-creators of the new world that God is striving to bring about, and that cannot be a passive enterprise. So in response to this, I want to suggest a second, I believe, more faithful way of looking at the end of all things, a way that I think is more faithful to the call that we have received in Jesus, and more true to the nature of power and leadership that is witnessed to in his life, death, and resurrection. This way has been called ethical eschatology, and it maintains that the world is not inherently an evil place, but there is indeed evil at work in the world, evil that needs to be negated. And it maintains that it is our role to actively work and protest against it, to non-violently resist any system judged to be evil, unjust, and violent. Be sure that you see that this way of looking at the end of all things is every bit as dramatic and drastic as the other. It does not say that there are only a few minor improvements that are needed. No, it looks at what seems to be the world's normal situation of discrimination and violence, of exploitation and oppression, of injustice and unrighteousness. It looks at the systemic and structural evil that surrounds and envelops us all, and in the name of God, it calls us to refuse to cooperate with or participate in such processes. In ethical eschatology, we are called to work together with God to oppose systemic evil without succumbing to its own violence. In ethical eschatology, God is waiting for us to act, and not only waiting, but calling upon us to act, demanding that we act. But the action to which we are called is not violent, for our God is not a violent God. What this means is that while the end that we look for is a dramatic and drastic end, it is not an end that is to be feared. Rather, it is an end to be longed for, an end to be hoped for, an end to be worked for. And I would suggest that this is the end that Jesus offers us even today. These are not visions of a violent end of the world that a vengeful and violent God will soon visit upon us. Rather, they are visions of the upheaval that is the natural result of the sort of ethical and non-violent movement that Jesus, in his life, death, and resurrection, was calling and is calling us to. There is in our actions a new creation that is being birthed even now. The birth is difficult and it is a strenuous labor, but it is not a violent one. And because it is not violent, it is not an order where those who are on top get their just desserts, which is really just more of the same. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Rather, it is a non-violent, non-reactive order where the new boss looks nothing at all like the old boss. That is the order that we are called to work towards, and that is an order that we can celebrate, not fear. I know, of course, that all of this probably sounds like so much pie in the sky, but I would suggest that even now we see hints and guesses of such new beginnings. We can see it in the lives of people like Mahatma Gandhi, or Dorothy Day, or Martin Luther King. We can see it every time that we are involved in active resistance to whatever systems we encounter that oppress and do not liberate, that tear down and do not build up. Ultimately, in the end, at the last, it is this end that I believe we are called to. It is this action that the cross of Jesus stands as a witness to. It is not easy, that much is certain, but it is good. So do not fear. Watch for and work for an ending worth living and dying for, today and every day of your life. Until next time, here are familiar words from Dame Julian of Norwich. He did not say, "You will not be tempested," or "You will not be troubled," or "You will not be distressed," but he did say, "You will not be overcome."